This is the second half of a reading of civil rights memories from 63 and 64 of the last century, and they are appearing in written form in progressivechristianity.org under my last name, Robert OSullivan. My own involvement in the civil rights struggle started as a young person growing up in Berkeley. While attending California Concordia College and high school in Oakland, I participated locally in the civil rights movement and walked many a precinct fighting an anti-fair housing measure on the state ballot. But I never fully experienced the ugliness of racism until my ministry aspirations took me to Concordia Senior College in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It was a strange place to be, especially for a left-handed half-Irish kid from Berkeley, of all places. The Fort Wayne metropolitan area was later rated by USA Today as the least desirable large one in the country. That would get little argument from CSE students, many of whom had come from feeder prep schools, combination junior colleges and high schools, that were located in more sophisticated urban environments. The college was all male, something very unusual for about half of the students, and reflected the largely German heritage of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. I had classmates with names like Schierschlick, Schliepsig, Tubesing, and Buschkemper, not to mention many variations of Meyer, Mayer, 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 Meyer, and more. When Mississippi Governor Ross Barnett was gaining notoriety in the spring of 1963 for excluding blacks from the University of Mississippi, he chose to seek Northern support by speaking at the Fort Wayne Rotary Club. I was one of the main organizers of would-be ministers showing up, along with the local NWACP, to demonstrate against his policies. It hit the national news, thanks to AP and other sources. It was news that even young Lutherans, generally a quiescent lot, were joining the growing student protest against injustice and racism. That evening, several of us protest participants wound up going for drinks at a local watering hole, which we had often frequented. Lutherans and beer were not strangers to each other. It was a beer saloon in a city of many breweries, featuring free cheese and crackers with sawdust on its floors. Lots of big mirrors behind the bar were about to help us to see the drama which would ensue. Our protest was the first item on the local TV newscast. People in the bar recognized me as a spokesperson interviewed. Soon there were confusing signalings going on as a bartender reached for something beneath the cash register. We feared it might be a weapon, but it turned out to be a glossy photograph. It got passed around the tavern with people saying things like, "No more trouble there. Those students should learn from this. The only thing worse than is a lover." When the photo came to me, I was asked for my reaction. The photo was of a relatively recent lynching, 1930s, in the nearby Marion, Indiana, 8 miles away. The smirks on whites partying below a northern tree with strange fruit still symbolizes for me the demonic evil that often bedevils our world. I said it was the most obscene thing I had ever seen. There was a long, long silence. The tension was palpable. Eventually, someone said something which got the crowd commenting and laughing. We got moving. No time for kumbaya. My friends and I got out of there as quickly as we could. A high official at the school, an embarrassed Rotarian, I was told that he said we had set back the school's public relations 10 years, most impressive since it had only existed for 7, sought to get me expelled or disciplined. For what? We were careful to say that we were not officially representing the school, but we were students there exercising First Amendment rights. Sources at the time told me that the tone of an intense faculty meeting changed when the Dean of Students, Herman Etzold, indicated how proud he was of what we did and how we conducted ourselves. Soon I was having occasional private lunches with the school's president, who discovered around the same time that I, somewhat different from most others, was also the editor of the school newspaper and magazine. The big surprise was that the Federal Bureau of Investigation started investigating me. It had someone borrow my address book for a day so they could copy it. Soon I was hearing that agents were interviewing many contacts they found there, all because I and others exercised First Amendment rights of freedom of speech and peaceable assembly to protest racist policies. It is one thing to be exposed to the racism of several individuals as it happened at the bar. It's quite another to learn personally how the most powerful law enforcement agency in the nation, the FBI, was engaged in suppressing and harassing the civil rights movement. After all, what probable cause was there that I had committed a crime? What happened to the Fourth Amendment protections from unreasonable searches and seizures? Wasn't the FBI supposed to be fighting organized crime rather than violating the rights of law-abiding and justice-loving citizens? It was strange. A couple of young women that I met sightseeing in Copenhagen and many others were being sought out to learn more about my background and beliefs, influenced by such notorious rebels as Moses, Amos, Micah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Jesus, Luther, Lincoln, Thoreau, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King. Ironically, agents must have learned a lot about my contacts with the Walter League, the international youth organization of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, in which I had been quite active. Back in the late 50s and early 60s, the organization, like many denominational equivalents and campus ministries, were sensitizing youth to issues of hunger, race, and injustices. Subversive activity, wouldn't you say? At the time, I assumed the investigation happened because of some overzealous local agent in a very conservative town not liking what we did. But history tells us clearly, thanks in part to a break-in in an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, to persistent reporting by NBC journalist Carl Stern, and to later investigation of Senator Frank Church's committee, that the agency, without constitutional or statutory grounds or congressional oversight, was actively involved in trying to suppress the civil rights movement as well as to harass and discredit its leaders. From its top leadership, the FBI actively pursued the suppression of dissent, whether civil rights, anti-war, feminist, or gay, by infiltrating campuses and groups in all sorts of ways. Informers, administrator, faculty, clerks, and students, monitoring mail, phone calls, and spying on people, to, in words known only because of some frustrated patriots, broke in to an FBI office for plenty of reasons, chief of which is to enhance the paranoia endemic in these circles and will further serve to get the point across that there is an FBI agent behind every mailbox. See The Burglary, The Discovery of J. Edgar Hoover's Secret FBI by Betty Metzger, a former Washington Post reporter, published in 2014 by Knopf. Curiously, two of the burglars were college professors, one a professor of religion. A movie has been made about this burglary titled 1971. History clearly tells what happened to me happened to many others, often in much more serious forms. FBI harassment of Martin Luther King, actress Jean Seberg, and many others are shameful blots of the official misconduct of the most egregious type, not to mention complicity in the murder of Fred Hampton. Agents suggested suicide to King and spread vicious rumors about Seberg, which drove to her suicide. In 1976, Clarence M. Kelly, the then FBI director, said, "During most of my tenure as director of the FBI, I've been compelled to devote much of my time attempting to reconstruct and then to explain activities that occurred years ago. Some of these activities were clearly wrong and quite a few indispensable. We most certainly must never allow them to be repeated." It's a sad commentary on freedom in this country that the gross governmental abuse of power often can only come to light through the courage of criminal whistleblowers, such as the media burglars, Daniel Ellsberg, Chelsea Manning, and Edward Snowden. Isn't it obscene that the 20th century's most powerful and dangerous scofflaw racist in this country still has his name on the FBI headquarters? That fact remains to us that the lawless racism of that agency was just as ugly and far more dangerous as that of a northern Indiana lynch mob. Curiously, years later, when Life magazine did a special issue commemorating the civil rights movement, that same photo I saw in the bar was published right at the start of the issue. The first photo inside, it jarred me seriously. Confirmed that was from Marion, Indiana, 8 miles from Fort Wayne, in the 1930s. I never expected to see it again. But it was part of what brought me to join the marchers in Washington 54 years ago. The following year, 135 CSE students joined in a protest when Alabama Governor George Wallace came to town, running a racist campaign for presidency in the primary, using language which would later be trumped. At the time, we were joined by several faculty members and a large group of Roman Catholic priests in training from the Crozier House of Studies. 3 years ago, many classmates gathered for a 50-year reunion. It was reassuring to hear many of them tell how the civil rights involvement shaped their later careers, where in different forms and contexts, they soon became involved in many comments to fight the results of bigotry, injustice, poverty, and ignorance. Over a dozen went to Selma in 1965. One, a rookie pastor, found the first integrated daycare center in Louisiana shortly after finishing seminary in 68. Many are involved these days in welcoming immigrants, fighting for health, housing, and nutrition, and opposing injustice and discrimination in many forms. The summer of 64 for me included some unusual results. I returned to the Bay Area as I awaited visa for a radio broadcasting job I had accepted in Nigeria. Committed to nonviolence, I engaged in sit-ins which could have led to arrest in San Francisco hotels and at the Republican National Convention, which nominated Barry Goldwater. We were left sitting. At the RNC, all front entrances at the Cow Palace were blocked, but delegates were let out other exits. It's a strange feeling to be willing to accept the consequences of nonviolent direct action only to be ignored by the powers that were. By a coincidence, my Pan Am flight to West Africa that fall included a large number of the leaders of the American Civil Rights Movement. After they experienced a difficult summer in Mississippi and elsewhere, they were rewarded with a vacation in the newly independent nation of Guinea, thanks to the generosity of entertainer-activist Harry Belafonte. The recent book, Kennedy and King, The President, the Pastor, and the Battle Over Civil Rights, by Stephen Levinson, tells how crucially important the folk singer-actor was in facilitating communication between civil rights leaders and the reluctant Kennedy administration. He also donated and raised large amounts of money for bail and legal fees during the Birmingham and other struggles. He truly used his popularity and wealth to foster winning the struggle. On the flight, I had a long conversation with Julian Bond, with whom I would later be in contact over the years, especially when we were both involved in the Congressman Morris Udall for presidency campaign. That was a progressive alternative to Jimmy Carter in '76, but Mo kept coming in second in the primaries. I sometimes think how differently our future might have been under a Udall-Bond administration rather than a centrist Carter-Mondale one. Throughout his life, Bond proved to be a brave and sophisticated leader who was a SNCC communications director, Vietnam War opposing Georgia state legislator, teacher, actor, journalist, eyes on the prize narrator, NAACP head, and as he liked to think of himself, a race fan.